Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It really depends when you're watching this video right now. So we are going to be having a conversation around what defines deviance or deviance perspectives, kind of looking at it from anywhere you want to kind of see, right? From a total perspective to a relative perspective to an absolutist perspective. There's lots of ways to be able to view deviance. And as we're just getting started, I wanted to introduce myself. As you've seen in the introductory video, my name is Professor McQueen, and I'm going to be taking you through this lecture. So bear with me. We're going to do the whole me floating on a slide background. So please wait while this loads, and then we'll get to all the good stuff here, right? So while I'm loading up this information, remember that deviance does break down to kind of an absolutist or relativist or constructionalist approach. And I'm looking forward to kind of covering, as you can see on the slide, hopefully deviance perspectives and what this means. So this is an introduction essentially to the different approaches that are often used to analyze deviance, right? Well, we will see that we can use various approaches, and I encourage you to explore these by comparing and contrasting and critically examining the viewpoints of the theorists and the theories as your own as we proceed through the weeks, because it really comes down to a 50-50 kind of split is what I've found in my experience. And this is what you need to look at as we proceed through the weeks. So when we think of deviance, we often think of the worst things that people have done in our society. A common depiction of deviance at the extreme point would be someone who breaks the law or does something that is really just seen as evil, right? Evil to whom is the question you should ask, right? But that people have done in our society, right? Something so bad that it sticks with us. So on the photo here, you're going to see Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Gein. And these are common depictions of deviance in the extreme examples, someone who breaks the law. We may think of serial killers like this picture shows of Jeffrey Dahmer, who have lured his victims to his home and murdered and ate them, right? This was an extreme, appalling case that when he was arrested, tried, and sentenced, Dahmer was murdered in his cell by his inmates, thus showing even in the world of deviance, there tends to be levels of what people do or don't accept. That's a whole conversation for another time. Or we may think of movies that have depicted such villainous characters, such as the creepy one from The Silence of the Lambs, right? That whole thing with Hannibal Lecter. Unfortunately, the character of this movie and several others have been based off real life serial murders, or serial killers, if you want. Ed Gein, who famously had both eaten and used body parts to make these items, is an example of this situation, right? So we see this scenario building out of, and if this is what we see as deviance, why does it not just continually hold this negative correlation? You'd be correct if that was the entirety of it, right? But what we need to see is that even though you can take situations like this, you have to tie out even further examples, because I'll be using examples such as these in the first week to draw comparisons, starting with the simple and extreme examples, allowing us to move to a more complex understanding of deviance in society. But as you will see, and what you'll learn and grow from in this course, is that deviance is much more than extreme behavior. So how do we define deviance then, right? Well, that brings up the question of the following. What approaches are we using, right? How are we going to be able to look at this? We could go from the biological or physiological speaking. We could look for abnormalities, pathologies, other predispositions based on genetics, intelligence, IQ, or personality traits. These are all acceptable approaches, but they limit our understanding of the individual level, right? For instance, does genetics have connection to deviance? Scientific evidence now generally suggests that the nature and nurture are not at odds with each other at all and are likely working together. For instance, we know about epigenetics, right? Or our biology and environment are intertwined. When our genes when our genes are altered by our environment, that is really the important thing of starting off to the point for us when we talk about deviance. So even if someone may have genetic predisposition to commit crimes, how does their environment shape their behavior? Stop and think for that for a second. Maybe something worth posting on Yellowdick. How does the environment play to this? How much power, right? Keep in mind that as we progress through our weekly topics, and especially around social theories, another approach would be to take the statistical, right? Gaining this understanding of how stats play into this. Statistical data. I know it's crazy to think how numbers could go this way. But let's say that we take a statistical measurement of behaviors or conditioning and say that those who fall so many deviations from the norm would be considered deviant. So this means that I'm deviant since I'm left-handed. Well, not myself, right? If I was deviant, I would say this. My mentor is left-handed. My father is left-handed. And I guess that would make him deviant if I'm not correct, right? So we go down this path of, and if when it comes to family, has to go back to be extremely deviant, since being that my dad is a deviant, since he's left-handed, now we're just a family of deviants, right? Statistically speaking, that is quite rare. Well, may not be very helpful when it comes to the daily life in the 21st century, when we generally type with our both of our hands, right? We're going WASD if you're a gamer, etc., and don't have a pencil that comes across in that way, right? That lays on someone's maybe deviant left hand. And I'm sure that you understand kind of where I'm coming with this. Just being an odd on the idea of measurements, of statistics. Categories basically are used to be able to create the norm. Stepping away from the norm would be the definition of deviance, right? So the most helpful way to define deviance would be to look at things from an objective stance, whether it be data, whether it be absolute, whether it be relativist. So since those extreme cases are easy to recognize, let's go back to some simple situations, right? So let's start with this, right? Here's a photo of Charles Manson, who we can already agree is deviant and criminal and has led to a cult of followers to commit murders, right? The Manson family. He represents for us someone who we don't want to be like. Some social theorists may say that we take an absolute approach to deviance, similarly to the pathology, right? Deviance may be viewed as objective. This is normal behavior, and there is deviant behavior. Absolutists then see deviance as something that is often rooted in what is seen as unnatural or pathological. On this photo, you also see John Wayne Gacy. I'm from Chicago, so the idea of the killer clown is extremely deviant, right? Or they may say that normative behavior is good, deviant behavior is bad. So it's bad, good, bad, good. So you see where that can kind of be used to create barriers. Well, this works well in the most heinous of crimes and situations, and also works well if we are discussing deviance within one community, culture, or subculture. But what about when we are comparing behaviors across cultures or societies? When there is one culture, a behavior is normalized, but in another it would be considered deviant, such as where we eat. So sticking with a more nuanced, albeit fictional example, what would be an absolutist say about the fictional character of, let's say, Dexter Morgan, right? This is someone who a lot of people on TV watch and give a lot of deviance admiration. We'll get to that point a little bit later, right? But while Dexter's character would be quote unquote evil, right? He's a serial killer. For those of you who haven't watched the show, Dexter, the storyline is that he is a serial killer, but he only kills bad people. So now you're looking at somebody who kind of plays that range of how we view them, right? He's the killer of the serial killers. So is he bad or is he good? Those comic book fans in you might take examples like Punisher. He only hurts those who have done bad. So use these kind of examples. But you might be able to say that it's a bit more complex. Maybe, maybe not, depending on your approach, right? We can likely admit that this is a bit of a stretch that is still breaking the rules, that we would want to teach others not to do this as well, right? Relativists see deviance as varying depending upon how norms are socially constructed, instead of an absolute definition of the right and wrong made by nature and nurture, right? We have this kind of combination. You start looking at made by a higher law or a higher power. Social constructionalists, and particularly relativists, argue that the definition of deviance, it's not universal. Think back to your social 101 classes. It's not a cultural universal, it's a particular. Rather, it changes depending upon people's definitions. Looks at their definitions at the different places and different times. Many contemporary social theoretical assumptions about deviance stem from this perspective. So when we take a look at Dexter Morgan, right? We may up actually liking his character. He is riding the world. He is ridding the world and riding high, right? Of bad people. But wait, his character is a bad person, right? We can argue that Dexter is a murderer, is wrong because it's murder, because we are governed by that same social norm assumption portrayed in the television show. But we also have rules in our own society, not just TV shows, not just about how, if there's rules around how we show that murder is done and that is wrong to do. It's something not seen as deviant, such as those that are committed by officials in war or in death penalty. Other murders are considered self-defense or justified by our own laws, which leads us to another layer of social relativism that links into social power, right? So we think about this idea, right? How do we go down this? Well, that's why we look at this idea that which, as our social power dictates, that's where it gets complicated. Theorists who take this approach, such as Becker, whom we'll study in this class, explain that those who make the rules also get to decide what is and what isn't deviance. That is, those who have power make the rules and decide how and when they are enforced. Sticking with a slightly extreme example of Dexter's character, for those of you who haven't seen it, Dexter works for and with the police as a blood spatter analysis, and his sister is a detective within the organization. Dexter is able to use the power to his advantage, which keeps his behavior hidden and keeps him below the radar, and he isn't exposed to being labeled as a serial killer. So while this is a fictional story, think about how this could apply in the current situations, right? He's able to work the system. So when we come down to this conversation of the complications of deviance, right? Because he's able to work the system, he doesn't get exposed as a serial killer. So while this is a functional story, think about how this could apply to real life events and social issues as well. So with a couple of the over-the-top examples this week, this should give some insight how we can view deviance in different ways. As you read through the specific topics in articles and theories and consider how to define deviance in different ways, do all societies have deviance? I question you that. Do all societies have deviance? Well, in different ways, do all societies maintain the same norms? Probably not, but look into it. You also explore how to view deviance. Is it always negative? Can it be positive? Can it be neutral? Right? Well, if being left-handed would be neutral today, although a century ago it would not have been, it would have been seen as immoral, right? And that leads us to the relativity. The choices and decisions we make often relate to situations that we are in, people who socialize us, the deeper extreme social behaviors, the more we find the complexities of our world. While you go through the next several weeks, keep in mind that the approach matters for your analysis. I'm going to say that again. The approach matters for your steps in analysis and how you look at it, right? And examples are great. Examine the examples through different lenses and combinations of approaches to gain a deeper understanding of sociology and the sociology of deviance, right? So some ideas to consider here that I want you to kind of think about is those who make the rules get to decide what is or what isn't deviant. So think of the power elite, the bourgeoisie. Sorry, I'm in the way for the bottom one, but there you go. You can see the thoughts, right? Just momentary thing for you there. Those who make the rules decide what is or isn't deviant. Those who have the power make the rules, decide how and when they are enforced. And it's a powerful statement. Like here, and encourage you to think about it as we go forward in this class. I want you to remember deviance is a very, very complicated topic. And I'm looking forward to having you study it, look into it, gain an understanding, and give some more examples of what you think. I just gave Dahmer, I gave Gacy, I gave Dexter, I gave Punisher, looked at the idea, is it biological? Is it physiological? Is it sociological? Is it constructed? Is it absolute? Right? These are the complications that comes into studying deviance. And I'm excited for you to go through these chapters, these readings, and hear your understandings. But this will give you a good little summary of what we're looking at, and I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you in the next one.